bone to pick with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan and MCMC Services LLC Mediator Company. If you're not them, please feel free to stick around though, because the more we talk about the tragedy and the audacity that is the US sick care system, the harder it is for them to ignore us. I don't think you'll be disappointed. Hi friends, welcome back. I'm Liv, a queer disabled woman who unfortunately lives in Texas. I share about my life with chronic illness and also explore the complicated intersection of health, culture, and politics through social commentary. And boy, do I have a story for you today. Most of you know that I was officially diagnosed with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome in December of 2023 after decades of symptoms and dismissal by doctors. And most of you also know that I have been fighting my insurance provider pretty much ever since then over a single gene genetic test that my provider ordered during the diagnostic process. Well, I just got a letter from the outside mediator company with the final binding decision on the insurance claim, and unsurprisingly, they sided with the insurance company. But that isn't even the worst part. It is the bold claims they made about my health in the response, and I absolutely cannot stay quiet about this, because if they're doing this to me, I know that they are doing it to other people. And at this point, I absolutely refuse to sit back silently while they continue to treat us like healthcare and health is some sort of privilege instead of something we should be giving to everyone, especially the most vulnerable people in our population. Because you know what? That is actually a characteristic of a civilized society. So we're gonna get into all of that today. But first, please remember to like, subscribe, and comment for engagement because it really helps out the channel. And actually, I'm really curious what all of you think is in this denial letter that has me so worked up. So please comment your guesses below and then come back at the end of the video and let me know if you were right. All right, let's do this. Okay, so I know that some of you are familiar with my diagnosis and everything that happened with insurance after the fact, but just to really set the scene for what's in that final denial letter, I want to take a minute to summarize everything, including the clinical diagnostic criteria for hEDS. I am even going to use my real medical records to explain everything so that you can see how I more than meet the criteria for the diagnosis. If you already know all of this and just want to skip ahead to the brilliantly worded denial letter, then I will put the chapter and timestamp somewhere in here, and you can just go ahead and skip to right there, but I don't think you're going to regret sticking around and seeing what happens. So I'm not going to go through a detailed medical history, but basically I've had symptoms of EDS and comorbid conditions like dysautonomia, MCAS, and neurodivergence since childhood. My symptoms worsened in middle school around the age of 12 when I came down with flu, strep throat, and mono all at the same time. And it makes sense now looking back because some more recent research points to Epstein-Barr, which is the virus that causes mono, as a catalyst for developing or worsening chronic conditions such as MS, fibromyalgia, connective tissue disorders, and autoimmune disorders. So anyway, that basically became the trend for the next 2 decades of my life, gradually worsening symptoms and new symptoms with little or no help from medical professionals, whether I had insurance or not. And part of me understands that in hindsight, because if you don't know anything about EDS, and most doctors don't outside of the stereotypes, the symptoms seem so random and disconnected. Like, How could so many different things like headaches and joint pain and blood pressure and heart rate issues all be connected together, because it seems so random and disconnected? And I didn't get it either. But then sometime around 2016 or so, a family member on my mom's side of the family reached out to me and let me know that they had been diagnosed with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And they wanted to reach out to me because they had been following my symptoms on Facebook over the years and recognized that their symptoms and my symptoms really lined up. And since we were related, there might be a connection. Everything that they told me sounded really familiar, and I did my own research and agreed that EDS sounded like a good candidate that would describe all of the symptoms I had been experiencing for my whole life. The thing was, I was in this rare sort of like remission period with my health at that time, where my symptoms were more manageable, my pain was kind of under control, and I really just wanted to live my life while I had a chance, instead of spending all of my time and energy and money on doctor's visits like I had been. So I put it off. I lived my life for a while, as long as I could, until my body started to literally fall apart. I mean, there was a good period of time where every time I turned around, I was breaking ribs just from existing. And at that point, I just couldn't ignore my health anymore. But this time, when I decided to restart that health journey and try to figure out more about what was going on, I was pretty sure that I had EDS by this point. Not only because of the extensive research I had done in the time since my family member reached out and let me know about the diagnosis, also because of a conversation I had with a decades-old friend from high school who knew all about my symptoms, and they had also recently been diagnosed with EDS and reached out and let me know that our overlapping symptoms sounded familiar and that I should maybe look into EDS. And when she saw the skin on my hands and how it had changed in just a few years, she was even more certain that I had EDS, and so was I. So I started this health journey again sometime around 2021, 2022, and for once in my life, I've actually had a really good run of luck when it comes to my healthcare team. Everyone from my PCP to my cardiologist, my physical therapist, orthotic rheumatologist, all of them have had some sort of basic knowledge when it comes to EDS, which was very surprising to me since so many doctors in years prior had never even heard of it. Unfortunately, none of them were qualified to diagnose because it was just outside of their scope of practice and their specialty, but all of them have listened to me, have believed me, have accurately charted my suspicions that the symptoms and family history sounded like EDS and related disorders. It was sometime in mid-2023 when I saw a post in a local Ehlers-Danlos syndrome Facebook group recommending a new medical practice that was opened by a nurse practitioner who also had EDS. She'd worked in the local area for many years, I think in family medicine, and she knew firsthand how hard it is to get appropriate assessment and treatment when you have EDS. So she decided to help fill part of that gap in treatment and open her own practice that was available online in multiple states to help increase accessibility for treatment and diagnosis for people with EDS. Unfortunately, because it was a new practice, she didn't take insurance yet, and I could not afford the out-of-pocket fee. Though it was incredibly reasonable, I'm just poor. So in the meantime, I decided to go ahead and get a medical grade genetic test through Invitae for connective tissue disorders because I didn't need a referral to get it and insurance would cover it. It was September of 2023 at this point, and I gave a very thorough personal and family history when I made my appointment. I'm talking pages and pages and pages of notes organized by body system and suspected diagnosis because neurodivergent. And when I get in the groove, I really go through with it. So first I met with the genetic counselor, which was also online, and that was really convenient for me. They reviewed all of my medical records, my family history, my personal history, and they decided to order genetic testing because to them, they saw evidence of a potential connective tissue disorder in my history and my family's history. So remember this, the test was mailed to my home. I did it here. I mailed it back, and within 2 weeks, I think it was, I had negative results, which is what I suspected because scientists don't currently know which genes cause hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. More on that later, but ruling out other connective tissue disorders against known diseases and known genes helps narrow down the potential causes of my symptoms and adds weight to Section 3 of the hEDS Diagnostic Criteria, which also more on that later. By now it was November of 2023 and we'd finally gotten the money together for me to see the EDS provider that I'd found earlier in the year. The process involved 2 appointments, one for history, examination, and ordering any testing, and then one for reviewing results and any diagnoses. So my first appointment was mid-November of 2023. She reviewed my complete medical history, including family history. She asked in-depth clarifying questions, and she conducted an exam that went step by step through the diagnostic criteria of hEDS, because yes, you can do that online. Based on some of my symptoms, she thought it was worth testing for the TNXB gene, which is associated with classical-like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and some overlapping and co-occurring conditions. The Invitae test that I had taken earlier in the year did not include TNXB, so she ordered a new test for that single gene from GeneDx. Like the other genetic test, it was mailed to my house, I took it, I sent the sample back, and we waited for the results. We then met for the second appointment a few weeks later, which was in mid-December, where she officially diagnosed me with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and my TNXB gene test came back negative. And at first, everything was great. I had a new treatment plan specifically tailored to me. I had referrals to physical therapy, orthotics, and for mental health. But sometime in early 2024, if I recall correctly, I received a letter from insurance informing me that genetic tests for TNXB was denied because my doctor did not clearly explain the medical necessity of the test and how it would improve my health outcomes, or I guess what they call clinical utility. Good news though, they were giving me 6 months to dispute the denial by submitting a response and relevant medical record. Don't worry if it's complicated or overwhelming, just call us and we'll provide a totally unbiased advocate to help you. And no need to worry about those pesky medical professionals either. Sure, we can talk to them if you really want us to, but it'll have no bearing on our final decision. Oh, no. Instead, it's your responsibility as the patient to successfully argue the clinical utility of a trained professional's diagnostic plan. I mean, what could go wrong with that? Sounds like a surefire method for success if I ever saw one, and definitely not a plan to set up the patient, make them lose hope, and fail, allegedly. Point being, I ended up just completing the appeal paperwork myself because if an advocate and my doctor couldn't actually help me, why waste the time and energy? That's not to say that I didn't do a good job with the paperwork. I mean, I'm a perfectionist and an A+ student, so I included very thorough medical records and I'm very skilled at rhetoric. Thank you very much. I admit I pushed off sending the appeal until nearly the end of the 6-month month deadline, partially because of demand avoidance, but also because I was angry. And if they were going to allegedly waste my time and make me jump through hoops to get the care that we pay them for, I was going to take all of the time that they gave me to do it. I expected another immediate form letter style denial because that's what I would do if I was heartless and money hungry and trying to wear down a vulnerable person, allegedly. So I was not shocked when some weeks later I got a second denial letter in the mail. I think it was sometime near the end of 2024 at this time, an entire year since my diagnosis, and they gave me another 4 months to appeal the decision, this time with a final binding mediation through an outside company, should they decide to take on my case, which they did. And I mean, what else was I gonna do anyway? So I took those 4 months to craft another well-argued appeal and gather relevant documents to fax, and then I waited again. I wasn't sure what to expect. I hoped for the best, but considering the circumstances and my history with the healthcare system, I let myself get comfortable with the idea of the worst. And after reading the final denial letter, I am glad I did, because wow. Okay, I know you're probably ready to hear the letter now, and I promise that I'm almost there, but first there is one more piece of context you need to fully understand the absolute audacity, and that is the clinical diagnostic criteria for hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. As a special bonus for those of you who made it this far, I'm using my actual medical records to explain the diagnostic process. So first, what's clinical diagnosis and why do we use that to diagnose hEDS? Basically, there are two types of diagnosis. There's clinical and there's medical. Clinical diagnosis relies on physical exams and patient's personal and family medical history. Well, medical diagnosis involves additional imagings or tests that can confirm the clinical diagnosis. For Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, this generally means testing for known genetic markers, but out of the 14 currently known types of EDS, hypermobile EDS is the only one without a known genetic cause. Scientists are currently hard at work searching for the cause or the causes, as some researchers currently believe that hEDS may actually be multiple types of EDS, and we just don't know that yet. But until we have a gene to confirm against, doctors must rely on clinical diagnosis for hEDS. Also, keep in mind that clinical diagnosis does not mean less stringent or fact-based than medical diagnosis. It's just a different method, a long-held, peer-reviewed, science-backed method that doctors use every day when making diagnoses, especially in the absence of definitive tests. I mean, just think about it. You don't have to be a doctor or any type of medical professional to diagnose something like a broken bone or a cold. The signs and symptoms are usually obvious and you don't need testing. That is clinical diagnosis. Often, testing just gives the doctors more information about something that they already know, and it works the same way when a qualified medical professional gives a clinical diagnosis of hEDS. Here is the official diagnostic criteria of hEDS as of 2017. Now, the experts are currently working on an updated version of this diagnostic criteria, and what I have seen so far actually looks really exciting. But for now, this is the current diagnostic criteria, and it was what was used to diagnose me with hEDS. So there are 3 sections or criterion, and you have to meet specific criteria under each section to meet the clinical diagnosis. Here is that same form in my actual medical records as filled out by a qualified medical professional after my exam and seeing my medical history and my family's medical history, my testing, all of that put together. We're going to start out with criterion 1. Okay, so for criterion 1, we have the Baton score, which is not perfect. I recognize that, but it's what we use right now. And it's used to assess large and small joint hypermobility in 9 different joints. It also allows a bit of leeway because it is very common to have injuries or for muscles to get tighter as you get older, which will prevent some hypermobility. So it allows you to account for this past flexibility if your initial score is borderline. Now, adults need a 5 out of 9 in this section in order to pass and qualify in this section. My score is 9 out of 9, and I didn't even need any of the extra points to get me to that point. So, as you can see, I more than meet the criteria for Criterion 1.
Hey friends, welcome to the first episode of Editing Live. And today we're talking about the Baton score because apparently I didn't actually explain which 9 joints it assesses or how it assesses them. I overlooked giving the full explanation because the hEDS Diagnostic Criteria form doesn't actually explain the Baton score. I assume that's because it's redundant, as any medical professional qualified to diagnose hEDS would absolutely already know what the Baton score is. Anyway, the form only asks if the patient meets the required score, what that score is, and any additional criteria the patient meets if their score is 1 point below the age and sex-specific cutoff. This infographic from the Ehlers-Danlos Society is a great resource that goes step by step through measuring joint hypermobility. The first 2 small joints are the 5th or pinky fingers. Add 1 point for each pinky finger that bends beyond 90 degrees. The next 2 small joints are the thumbs. Add 1 point for each thumb that fully bends downward to touch the forearm. Then we have the first 2 large joints, the elbows. Add 1 point for each elbow that extends upwards more than 10 degrees. After that are the 2 large knee joints. Add 1 point for each knee that extends more than 10 degrees. The last joint and the last large joint is the spine. Add 1 point for placing both hands flat on the floor without bending the knees. A positive Baton score is greater than or equal to 6 out of 9 points in children before puberty, 5 out of 9 points from puberty up to the age of 50, and 4 out of 9 points for those 50 years of age and over. If the final Baton score, which measures current hypermobility, is 1 point below the age and sex-specific cutoff, then the patient's past hypermobility can be taken into account by selecting 2 or more of the following to meet the criterion. Can you now or could you ever place your hands flat on the floor without bending your knees? Can you now or could you ever bend your thumb to touch your forearm? As a child, did you amuse your friends by contorting your body into strange shapes, or could you do the splits? As a child or teenager, did your shoulders or kneecap dislocate on more than one occasion? And do you consider yourself double jointed? And that's about it for the Baton score, so back to your regularly scheduled programming for now.
Now, we're going to go on to Criterion 2, and in this section, it uses 3 parts to assess systematic symptoms of connective tissue disorders. And that is an important side note because the general stereotype of EDS is that it is just stretchy skin or bendy joints, which, I mean, like, that's so fun anyway. But connective tissue is not just in your joints or in your skin. The entire body is made of connective tissue. It literally makes up everything about us. So that is what makes EDS and connective tissue disorders in general systemic disorders. They can and do affect the entire body. So section 2 has 3 parts that involve systemic symptoms, features A, B, and C, and you need to have at least 2 to pass or qualify in this section. Feature A lists 12 systemic symptoms of connective tissue disorders. You need at least 5 of 12, and as you can see, I have 6 of the 12 symptoms to meet feature A. Those are the soft and velvety skin, mild skin hyperextensibility, scarring, unexplained stretch marks in the absence of weight changes, bilateral pesiogenic papules on the heels, and also arendactyl, which has to do with the length of your fingers in relation to other parts of your hands. I clearly meet, and more than meet, feature A of criterion 2. So feature B is for family history of systemic symptoms. You can check this part if you have a first-degree relative, which is a parent, a sibling, or a child who has already been diagnosed independently with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I could not check this box because I am the first person in my first-degree relatives to have been officially diagnosed. My other family member was not a first-degree relative. So this part I did not meet, but give it a few years and I'm sure some other of my family members will be diagnosed. Feature C involves systemic pain and joint issues. So for this part, you only need one of the three parts. And as you can see, I have all three of the parts more than meeting this criteria. All three of those parts are musculoskeletal pain in 2 or more limbs, chronic widespread pain, recurrent joint dislocations, or stability in the absence of trauma. I have all three of those. This means that I have features A and C, and that I also meet criterion 2. More than meet criterion 2, as you could see from my symptoms. The last section, criterion 3, is for differential diagnosis, which means ruling out alternative diagnosis such as autoimmune disorders or other types of connective tissue disorders which could cause similar symptoms. Based on physical exam and history, exclusion doesn't necessarily have to include genetic testing, but as the criteria states, it can be used as determined by a physician like mine did. In this final criterion, there are 3 parts or prerequisites, and you have to meet all 3 of them. Here you can see that my physician ruled out the differential diagnosis in all 3 categories, which means that she ruled out other connective tissue disorders, and she used the genetic testing to help with that. She ruled out autoimmune disorders, and she ruled out any other disorders that might have been causing those symptoms outside of hEDS. So with that, I meet criterion 3 of the diagnostic criteria, which means that I officially meet all 3 criterion for a clinical diagnosis of hEDS, which my physician determined was accurate, as you can see by my diagnostic paperwork right here. Oh, and one last note before we move on to the really juicy stuff. Remember that just because you might have some of these symptoms of connective tissue disorders, it does not necessarily mean that you have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or hEDS or any other type of connective tissue disorder. It's the systemic symptoms taken as a whole, along with medical history, that make a clinical diagnosis. And finally, here we are. We have made it to the main event, the absolutely beautiful denial letter from the people who've never met me, never examined me, and from what it seems, didn't even read my medical record, allegedly. The letter is dated March 26, 2025, but we don't check the mail every day because we don't get a lot of mail, and when we do, it's usually stuff like this, so I only got this letter recently. I am just gonna go through this and kind of point out some of the main highlights that really stuck out to me. On the first page here, we have just a basic statement talking about what they're gonna be doing in this review, that they're reviewing something to do with a genetic test for someone with Ehlers-Danlos, and it even explains that the reviewer is board certified in clinical biomedical genetics, clinical genetics, and pediatrics. They've been practicing since 1979, and they're currently an adjunct clinical professor, Department of Pediatrics at a medical school located in the Midwest. Okay, so they are a professor, not a practicing doctor. They specialize in pediatrics, which is not me, and they they have never met me before. I mean, that's kind of a big thing. I don't know this person. They've never seen or examined me, yet they're deciding whether the doctor who has reviewed decades of my medical history thoroughly is wrong. The fact that they are a genetics professor and a pediatrics professor, that really has nothing to do with me as an adult person seeking actual medical care, not something in theory that you talk about in a academic setting. The second page looks like it just goes over all of the papers that are going to be in here. This maybe was the first page originally, but I've got these kind of out of order looking at them. And it basically just says it's my external review from MCMC Services LLC, and it's their determination and it is their experts review reports. Oh, okay. This letter and its attachments were also sent to the claimant and the claimant's representatives and to the provider. What happens next? The determination is binding, which means if we've overturned the denial, your plan or health insurance will now provide you severance or payment. If they've upheld the denial, there's no further review available under the review appeals process. But I may have other remedies under state or federal law, such as filing a lawsuit. Yeah, I've got money for that, really. I can't pay this payment, but I've got money for a lawsuit when it's on something they should have paid for, in my opinion. Next page. Now we are into the actual meat and potatoes of this. They ultimately determined that they were sticking with the insurance company, as you know, and decided that this test did not have any clinical utility. They put this 38-year-old does not have findings in her personal medical and or family history consistent with, they listed a few disorders, nor any diagnosable connective tissue disorder. It's interesting to me that there's no family history when I literally have a relative who has been diagnosed. Also, the fact that I sent them like 30 pages of medical records at a cost of like $60 that they obviously didn't read because it was full of evidence suggesting connective tissue disorders, including my actual clinical diagnosis from a licensed medical professional. But, you know, whatever, I guess I don't know anything. Furthermore, extensive genetic and clinical testing has not demonstrated any evidence of a genetic disorder of connective tissue in her. Well, yeah, because hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome doesn't have a known gene, which again, you should know as a genetic professor, right? That none of the testing would come up positive if I have hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos because there's not a gene. And if it came up positive, that would mean it wasn't hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos, but another type of Ehlers-Danlos or a connective tissue disorder. I mean, are you following me here, or is that just not making any sense?
Hi, Editing Liv here, and I just realized something. Listen to how they phrased the first line of my clinical summary. This 38-year-old is said to have a diagnosis of hypermobility Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Is said? What do you mean, is said? Because again, it sounds like you're implying that I don't have hEDS when I literally provided you my clinical diagnosis from a licensed medical professional. Damned if we do, damned if we don't. Like, what do we have to do to get you to actually believe us?
They also mention how I have had 23andMe genetic testing that wasn't diagnostic either. Well, that's because 23andMe is a commercial company. It's not diagnostic, and to my knowledge, does not do any testing that has to do with connective tissue disorders. So that's not relevant, and someone who is a genetics professor should know that. I would think anyway. Okay, so in the clinical summary at the top, it says that the hypermobility form of Ehlers-Danlos has no associated genetic cause. That is true. Then goes on to say that my genetic testing coming back negative is a reason to explain that I don't have a connective tissue disorder. But Ehlers-Danlos, hEDS, doesn't have a genetic component, as you literally just stated at the top of the page. That makes no sense.
Hi friends, Editing Live again, and I just noticed something else. They got parts of my medical history wrong, which is not even close to the first time this has happened to me. I mean, I could make an entire video about the report from my psychological assessment last year, but that's a whole other story, so let me know if you want to hear that one. But anyway, the clinical summary states, other diagnoses include depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, and fibromyalgia. I don't have bipolar disorder. I have a whole collection of other diagnosed mental health disorders that they didn't even list, but bipolar disorder is not one of those. Yeah, there is a family history of bipolar disorder, but I don't personally have it. And yeah, I can see the comments already. Liberals, snowflakes, always nitpicking and everything. What do you care? It's not like it matters. When I was your age, we just died. Well, Chad, it is hard enough to get proper diagnosis and treatment when your medical records are accurate. But when there is a mistake, it literally puts your health and your life at risk. And that's all after you start wondering, well, if they got this wrong, what other mistakes are they making?
So basically, not only did they deny the insurance appeal and say that there was no clinical utility for this test, they boldly stated that not only is there no evidence of a genetic connective tissue disorder in my family's history, that there's no evidence in my history when I literally have a clinical diagnosis from a licensed medical professional that I provided to them, with 20 years of medical history and records at a cost of $60 to fax that it seems they didn't even read. So yeah, super bold, super infuriating to not only deny my claim, but to then go on and state that I don't have the disorder I have been diagnosed with. The audacity, the hubris. I cannot even comprehend what was put in this letter, and that somebody would write this and think that that is okay when they clearly didn't read my medical records that were provided to them. Because how can someone have no history of a connective tissue disorder in their family history when they've literally been diagnosed, when they literally have family members been diagnosed, when they have other family members who were suspected of having different types of connective tissue disorders, other family members who are currently in the process of going through the diagnostic process for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, but there's no evidence in my history. To me, and this is just my opinions, my thought, like everything in this video, it seems they didn't read a single word that I sent to them and then wrote a bunch of garbage to justify denying the claim. I don't really know what to think about this. It's actually taken me a couple of weeks to sit down and make this video because I've been so enraged, so upset. Like, I figured they would probably deny it because that is just how, healthcare works in our world, and especially in the United States right now. But the fact that they not only denied it, but then went on to question my diagnosis that's taken me 20 years of blood, sweat, and tears to finally find someone to take me serious. I'm so angry, and you should feel ashamed. I'm not really sure where to go from here or what's really gonna happen next. I assume at some point I am going to get some sort of notice that the claim was officially denied and I now owe thousands of dollars for this one single gene that was tested. I can't pay that. I don't have the money for that. And I'm not really sure what's going to happen when that does come my way, but I guess I will just take it as it comes and hopefully they will work with me because there is literally no way I can pay for that. I don't have a job. We live paycheck to paycheck and my husband can barely take care of us as it is. And on top of that, I shouldn't be having to pay for this at all because that testing, in my opinion, had clinical utility for my diagnosis. But I guess we'll just see what happens from here. I'm really glad you guys came along with me and that you are here for me to vent to about this sort of thing, and for us just to really bring awareness and get the word out about what happens to people, because I know I'm not the only one, and I know that this is happening to other people. So please remember to like, subscribe, share, comment for engagement to help support the channel. And don't forget to go back to your comment from the beginning of the video and let me know if you were right or your thoughts on what was actually in the letter. And more importantly, remember that you are not alone and your experiences are valid. Or in the words of the practitioner who diagnosed me with hEDS, you are not crazy and this is all real. Thanks for being here again, friends, and if you made it this far, I really appreciate you. Take care. Bye.
So high, I'm hypnotized. What's up is down, what's left is right. Chasing stars and holding you. I can't see the end, but we'll see it through.